Why don't we get to own anything in this country anymore? Why is it that this government is quite happy to prioritise shareholders far away, but it won't prioritise the British public? Meanwhile, we can't afford to live. There are 5 things this government could do if it wanted to actually show that it's actually standing up for ordinary people. Number 1, take back our water. Water is the most basic thing. It is a natural monopoly. You cannot choose which company you use. But in this crazy country, we decided to privatise our water. It's been a complete disaster from start to finish. And yet this government, which stood on doorsteps saying it would clean up our water industry, is refusing to bring Thames Water into public hands, even though it would be really easy for them to do that because Thames Water is literally collapsing. And they could cut the debt in the process, and shareholders wouldn't get their money back. If a company goes bust in a normal market, they go bust and they can't operate anymore. But because we all rely on Thames Water, 16 million people with absolutely no choice, they are stitching it up so that we are paying to bail out this company. And even if it has to be brought into special administration, which is the equivalent of it going bust, the government is looking at making sure it gets re-privatised again. Why don't we get to own it? Why don't we get to own our water companies in this country like everywhere else does, like 90% of the world does already? Number 2, energy. Energy transmission and distribution is a natural monopoly. Like with water, there is only one set of infrastructure, pylons carrying the electricity down the country, pipes carrying gas. That is a natural monopoly, and we are almost the only country in Europe that has privatised that transmission and distribution of energy. And under the Conservative government, they actually brought a little bit of National Grid into public ownership so that it could do more planning. Why doesn't the government just bring the whole thing into public ownership? Because we are paying more on our energy bills because that infrastructure is privatised. And they will say, oh, but we've set up Great British Energy, it's publicly owned. Okay, but it's tiny. They haven't given it much budget. Great British Energy is for generating energy, but it's going to be forced to work with the private sector because it's so small. Whereas in other countries, they actually say, we have a natural resource here. We're going to own it as a country. We're going to use it for this country's benefit. And that means that people's bills can go down. That's what they've done in places like Norway. We could do that here too, but this government is being too small-minded to even consider that. And Great British Energy is only going to be about generating energy. It's not going to be about selling it. So we still in this country have no option for buying our energy from a publicly owned energy company. That is a normal thing in other countries like France, Germany, Italy, the US. They have a publicly owned retail company, which means you can buy your energy from a publicly owned company, and that company has a mission to keep your bills low. Why can't we have that in this country? The government could make sure that Great British Energy actually has that retail wing, so we could buy our bills, we could get our bills directly from Great British Energy. And that way they could actually invest at scale in renewable energy and then pass on the benefits to us, the households, the consumers. So that's what they should be doing, bringing all of the infrastructure into public ownership and giving Great British Energy a much bigger budget and giving it a retail wing, a supply company arm, so that we actually see the results of it on our bills. Number 3, Royal Mail. Royal Mail was a 500-year-old successful institution in public ownership before it was privatised by the Conservatives and the Lib Dem government in 2013. That was a disastrous policy. And since it happened, we've seen our stamp prices increase. So we're all paying more. And meanwhile, Royal Mail is now owned by a billionaire, a Czech billionaire. So something that the British public used to own that we could be proud of is now owned by a Czech billionaire. And this government has just given the rubber stamp to that, when they could have said, actually, we want that back. That is a public asset. It makes money, it makes a profit. We want that profit going back into the service, going back into improvements. they could buy back Royal Mail for very little. It would actually be an easy one to buy back, and that would make so much difference to people's everyday lives. Why not put the Royal Mail and the post office back together, and you could buy up the post offices that are going to get shut down because WH Smith is closing down in high streets. Right now we've got the situation where high streets are in decline, WH Smith is leaving, and meanwhile there'll be these buildings which could be Crown post offices, and they could be open so that people can actually use them, use that service, send parcels, send letters, something that we always used to be able to do. We should have that back again. Number 4, the government should take back our NHS. Currently, we are wasting huge amounts of money because our NHS is so privatised. Our NHS did not used to be privatised in this way, but because of PFI, private finance initiatives, hospital trusts do not have the money that they need. Because of outsourcing, tons of money is being wasted on private profits that could be spent on seeing patients, on building operating theatres, on hiring staff. That money is being wasted on outsourcing contracts. Politicians are discussing the role of the private sector, ignoring the fact that France spends 26% more on its health service than we do, ignoring the fact that the NHS used to be the best healthcare system in the world just 10 years ago, before it was cut, before it was underfunded, before it was deliberately undermined and privatised. Get the private waste out of the system, take it back so it belongs to the British public as it was set up. It should belong to us. It used to belong to us, and it used to be the best healthcare system in the world. Number 5, how about publicly owned trains? Yes, the government is bringing the railway into public ownership in terms of who is running the franchises, who gets to run those trains. But who do the trains belong to? They belong to the rolling stock companies, which make mega profits. They are banks, essentially. They lend out these trains and they make massive profits from them, sometimes up to £1 billion a year. Why can't we be a country that owns our own trains? Either we could buy out these companies, or we could set up a new train manufacturer in the UK to produce publicly owned trains that we can use, so we don't have to pay a profit for the privilege of owning something that we just need on our railway. And we're seeing now that Reform UK is getting more and more popular, and they have now overtaken the Labour Party in the polls. Labour is losing a member every 10 minutes. So what is the government going to do to show that it's on the side of normal people? How about giving us back our public services that used to belong to the British people, making them work better than ever, making them into something we can be proud of as a nation, instead of working for a handful of shareholders across the world? That would show whose side the government is on. That would give the British public something to be proud of, and it would mean that our costs would go down. We would be spending less on our bills. If the government wants to show whose side it's on, it needs to take back our public services, take back our water, energy, Royal Mail, NHS, public transport.